The fascinating thing about silence is that most people misunderstand it completely. They think silence is weakness. Isn't that interesting? Here we are discussing one of the most powerful forces in human development, and most folks run from it like it's their enemy. Let me share something with you today that might change your entire perspective on being silent. You see, I've spent 40 years studying successful people, observing human behavior. And here's what I've discovered: the most powerful people I've ever met know when to be silent. Now, here's the thing about silence: it's not what you think it is. Most people think silence is the absence of something. But that's not true at all. Silence is the presence of wisdom. It's the presence of power. It's the presence of strategic thinking. I remember meeting this young fellow in Detroit. Bright kid, about 25 years old. He told me, "Mr. Rohn, I just can't seem to get ahead. I'm always talking, always sharing my ideas, always trying to convince people." I asked him one simple question: when was the last time you learned anything while you were talking? You see, that's the first principle of silence. You can't learn while your mouth is moving. Isn't that fascinating? We've got two ears and one mouth, and most people use them in the wrong proportion. Now let me tell you about what I call the 4 disciplines of silence. These aren't just ideas I came up with sitting in my backyard. These are principles I've observed in some of the most successful people in the world. The first discipline is what I call strategic silence. This is when you're in a meeting or a negotiation or even a casual conversation and you deliberately choose not to speak. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you understand something profound. Silence creates value. Have you ever noticed how the price of anything goes up when it's rare? Well, guess what's becoming increasingly rare in our world? Silence. Thoughtful, strategic, purposeful silence. The second discipline of silence is what I call learning silence. Now, this is fascinating. In all my years of teaching seminars around the world, I've noticed something remarkable: the people who take the most notes, who listen the most intently, who maintain that powerful learning silence, they're the ones who end up making the most extraordinary transformations in their lives. You know what most people do? They're so busy preparing their response that they never really hear what's being said. Isn't that interesting? They're physically present but mentally absent. They're in the room but not in the conversation. Let me tell you about a man I met in Chicago. Successful businessman, built his company from nothing to $100 million in revenue. I asked him his secret. You know what he told me? He said, "Mr. Rohn, I made it a practice early in my career to be the last one to speak in every meeting." Now, isn't that fascinating? The third discipline is what I call power silence. This is when you know something, when you have information that could change everything, but you understand the power of timing. You see, success is not just about knowing what to say, it's about knowing when to say it. I was teaching this principle at a seminar in Philadelphia, and a lady came up to me afterward. She said, "Mr. Rohn, I've been doing everything wrong. I've been using information like a weapon instead of treating it like a resource." She got it. She understood that power silence isn't about withholding, it's about wisdom. Now, here's something remarkable about silence. It makes everything else more valuable. Just like the spaces between musical notes create rhythm, the silences between your words create impact. Have you ever noticed how some people talk so much that their words become cheap? They've violated one of the fundamental laws of economics, the law of scarcity. When something's everywhere, it loses its value. But when something's rare, people pay attention. The fourth discipline of silence is what I call growth silence. This is perhaps the most powerful of all. You see, every major breakthrough in human consciousness, every significant personal transformation happens in moments of silence. Let me share something profound with you. Your life will never change until you change what goes on in your silent moments. Isn't that fascinating? Most people are so afraid of silence that they never give themselves the chance to grow. I remember a conversation I had with my mentor, Mr. Schoaf. He said something that changed my life forever. He said, "Jim, success is not something you pursue. Success is something you attract by the person you become." And you know where that becoming happens? In silence. Now, here's what's interesting about silence. It has different qualities. Just like there are different types of water, ocean water, rider, rainwater, there are different types of silence. There's the silence of reflection, the silence of preparation, the silence of strength. I met a gentleman in New York, brilliant investor, worth hundreds of millions. I asked him about his investment strategy. You know what he told me? He said, Mr. Rohn, I make my best decisions in complete silence. No phone, no television, no internet, just me and my thoughts. Here's something most people don't understand about silence. It's not passive, it's active. It's not empty, it's full. It's not weakness, it's strength. When you're silent, you're not doing nothing, you're doing something very powerful. Let me tell you about what I call the silent advantage. In any negotiation, in any relationship, in any situation, the person who can maintain purposeful silence has the upper hand. Not because they're trying to manipulate, but because they're operating from a position of strength. You see, silence is like a bank account. The more you invest in it, the more it grows and the more it can work for you when you need it. Now let me share with you what I call the 5 profits of silence. These are the tangible, measurable benefits that come from mastering the art of being silent. The first profit is clarity. Isn't it interesting how the answers to our biggest problems often come when we stop talking about them? When we create that space of silence, it's like clearing the fog from a window. Suddenly everything becomes clear. I was teaching this principle in Dallas, and a gentleman came up to me afterward. He said, Mr. Rohn, I've been struggling with a business decision for months. During your seminar, in those moments of silence between your words, the answer just came to me. Isn't that fascinating? The second profit is influence. Now, here's something remarkable. Your influence grows in direct proportion to your ability to be silent at the right times. Most people don't understand this. They think influence comes from talking, from convincing, from persuading. But true influence often comes from strategic silence. Let me tell you about what I call the silence ratio. I've observed that the most influential people speak about 20% of the time and listen 80% of the time. The least influential people do exactly the opposite. Isn't that interesting? The third profit is wisdom. You see, wisdom isn't just accumulated knowledge, it's distilled knowledge. And that distillation happens in silence. It's like making fine wine. You need time, you need patience, and most importantly, you need stillness. I remember asking one of the most successful mentors I've ever had about his morning routine. He told me something I'll never forget. He said, Jim, I spend the first hour of every day in complete silence. No radio, no television, no conversation. Just thinking, planning, reflecting. He understood something most people never learn. Wisdom grows in silence. The fourth profit of silence is what I call emotional intelligence. Now, isn't this fascinating? In all my years of studying human behavior, I've noticed that the people who can maintain silence in emotional situations are usually the ones who end up winning in life. You see, most people react immediately to everything. Someone says something they don't like, they respond right away. Someone criticizes them, they defend themselves instantly. Someone makes them angry, they let everybody know about it right then and there. But the masters of silence, they understand something profound. The space between stimulus and response is where your power lies. That's where your freedom lies. That's where your future is determined. Let me tell you about a meeting I observed in Seattle. 2 business partners were having a disagreement. One partner kept talking, kept arguing, kept trying to make his point. The other partner just sat there listening, maintaining what I call strategic silence. Guess who ended up controlling that meeting? Guess who ended up shaping the final decision? The fifth profit of silence is opportunity. Now here's something remarkable opportunities speak, a very quiet language. Isn't that interesting? While everyone else is making noise, complaining about circumstances, talking about what they're going to do someday, opportunities are whispering to those who have learned to listen. I met a lady in Chicago who built a multi-million-dollar business. I asked her about her success strategy. She said, Mr. Rohn, I made it a habit to spend 2 hours every day in complete silence. No phone, no email, no distractions, just thinking about opportunities. She understood something most people never grasp. The best opportunities don't shout, they whisper. Here's what's fascinating about silence. It's like compound interest for your personal development. The more you invest in it, the more it grows, and the returns keep multiplying. Now let me share with you what I call the silent disciplines. These are the daily practices that transform silence from a mere absence of noise into a powerful tool for success. The first discipline is what I call morning silence. You see, how you start your day often determines how you live your day. Isn't that interesting? Most people wake up and immediately fill their minds with noise, television, radio, social media, endless chatter. But the masters of silence, they understand something profound. The first hour of the morning is like the first dollar of your income. If you don't control it, it controls you. If you don't invest it wisely, it disappears without providing any value. I remember talking to a successful CEO in Miami. He told me, "Mr. Rohn, I used to start my days in chaos, responding to messages, rushing into meetings. Then I learned about the power of morning silence. Now I spend the first 45 minutes of every day in complete silence. It's changed everything." The second silent discipline is what I call strategic pauses. This is fascinating. In any conversation, in any meeting, in any situation, a person who can intentionally pause has tremendous power. Not because they're trying to manipulate, but because they're creating space for wisdom to enter. Let me tell you about something I call the 3-second rule. Before responding to anything important, take 3 seconds of complete silence. Just 3 seconds. It sounds simple, doesn't it? But this little discipline can dramatically change your life. You see, in those 3 seconds, something remarkable happens. Your emotions settle. Your wisdom rises. Your response improves. Isn't it fascinating how such a small investment of silence can yield such significant returns? The third silent discipline is what I call evening reflection. Most people end their days the same way they started them, in noise. They never give themselves the gift of silent reflection. Let me tell you about what I call the silent success formula. This is something I've observed in studying successful people for over 4 decades. It's a pattern that keeps repeating itself, yet most people never notice it. The formula goes like this. Silence leads to observation, observation leads to insight, insight leads to understanding, and understanding leads to power. Isn't that fascinating? The whole process starts with silence. Now, here's something remarkable about silence. It's one of the few things in life that becomes more valuable the more you use it. Most things depreciate with use, but silence, it appreciates, it grows in value. It compounds in power. I was teaching a seminar in Toronto, and a gentleman came up to me afterward. He said, "Mr. Rohn, I've been in sales for 20 years, always pushing, always talking, always trying to convince people. Today I learned that I've been doing it all wrong." He understood something profound. Silence isn't just the absence of talking. It's the presence of listening. Let me share with you what I call the silent strength principle. You see, most people think strength is about what you say, what you do, what you demonstrate. But true strength, it often shows itself in what you don't say, what you don't do, what you don't need to demonstrate. I remember meeting a highly successful negotiator in London. I asked him about his secret. He said, "Mr. Rohn, in any negotiation, the person who needs to talk the least usually has the most power." Isn't that interesting? He understood that silence isn't weakness, it's power under control. Now, here's something fascinating about silence. It has different levels, just like consciousness has different levels. There's surface silence where you're just not speaking. Then there's deep silence where your mind becomes still. And then there's what I call profound silence, where you connect with your inner wisdom. Let me tell you about what I call the silent revolution. This is happening right now all around us, but most people don't see it. You see, in a world that's getting noisier and noisier, silence is becoming one of the most valuable commodities. Isn't it interesting? We've created a world where everybody's talking, but very few people are actually saying anything. Everybody's making noise, but very few people are making sense. Everybody's broadcasting, but very few people are connecting. Here's what's fascinating. The most powerful people I know aren't the ones who talk the most. They're the ones who observe the most. They're not the ones who make the most noise. They're the ones who make the most sense. Let me share with you the 3 levels of silent power. The first level is what I call external silence. This is when you simply choose not to speak. It's the beginning, but it's not the end. The second level is mental silence. This is when you learn to quiet not just your voice, but your thoughts. You see, most people's minds are like a monkey jumping from tree to tree, always moving, never resting. But when you master mental silence, you gain extraordinary clarity. The third level is what I call strategic silence. This is when you understand not just how to be silent, but when to be silent. Timing is everything, isn't it? It's not just about knowing what to say, it's about knowing when to say nothing at all. I remember a conversation with a billionaire investor. He told me something profound. He said, "Mr. Rohn, I made my fortune not by knowing when to invest, but by knowing when to stay still." He understood the power of strategic silence in the marketplace. Now, here's something most people don't understand about silence. It's not passive, it's active. When you're truly silent, you're not doing nothing. You're doing something very powerful. You're observing, you're learning, you're gaining understanding. Let me tell you about what I call the silent mastery path. This is a journey that every great leader, every successful entrepreneur, every wise person I've ever met has taken, whether they realized it or not. The first step on this path is what I call conscious silence. This is when you begin to realize that every word you speak is either an investment or an expense. Isn't that fascinating? Most people never think about their words this way. They just talk and talk, spending their verbal currency like there's no tomorrow. I met a gentleman in Singapore, built an empire from nothing. I asked him about his communication style. He said, "Mr. Rohn, I treat my words like I treat my money. I invest them carefully and spend them wisely." Now, isn't that interesting? He understood something profound about the economics of silence. The second step is what I call productive silence. This is when you begin to use silence as a tool for creation, for innovation, for problem solving. You see, most breakthroughs don't happen in the noise, they happen in the silence between the noise. Let me share with you what I call the silent productivity formula. It goes like this: the quality of your silence determines the quality of your thinking. The quality of your thinking determines the quality of your decisions. The quality of your decisions determines the quality of your life. Here's something remarkable about silence. It's one of the few resources that we all have equal access to, but very few people choose to use. Isn't that fascinating? It's free. It's available 24 hours a day, but most people run from it like it's their enemy. I remember teaching this principle at a seminar in Sydney. A young entrepreneur came up to me afterward and said, "Mr. Rohn, I've been chasing success in all the wrong places. I've been looking for answers outside when I should have been listening to the silence within." Now let me leave you with what I call the silent legacy principles. These are the truths that will transform not just your understanding of silence, but your entire approach to success and fulfillment in life. First, understand this: your silence is your power, not sometimes, not occasionally, but always. In a world where everyone is fighting to be heard, the person who has mastered silence has mastered influence. Second, remember that silence is not the absence of something, it's the presence of everything that matters. It's in silence that you find your purpose. It's in silence that you discover your path. It's in silence that you develop your power. Third, and this is crucial, your life will never be the same once you understand that the quality of your silence determines the quality of your success. Not just in business, not just in relationships, but in everything that matters. Let me tell you something profound. The greatest gift you can give yourself is the discipline of silence. Not as an escape, but as a strategy. Not as a retreat, but as an advance. Not as a weakness, but as a strength. You see, life has a fascinating way of teaching us its most important lessons. And one of the most powerful lessons I've learned in my journey is this: when you master silence, you master yourself. When you master yourself, you master life. Remember this: every great achievement, every meaningful breakthrough, every significant transformation begins in silence. Not in noise, not in chaos, but in that powerful, purposeful silence where wisdom resides and where strength is born. So here's my challenge to you today. Don't just hear about silence, practice it. Don't just think about silence, invest in it. Don't just talk about silence, master it. Because in the end, it's not what you say that will determine your success, it's what you hear in your moments of silence. It's not how much you speak that will shape your destiny, it's how well you listen to the wisdom that only silence can reveal. Your future is waiting for you in the silence. Your greatness is waiting for you in the silence. Your destiny is waiting for you in the silence. That's the real truth about being silent. That's the wisdom that can transform your life. That's the power that can reshape your future. For a better life, Mr. Jim Rohn. Thank you